All right, guys, what's going on? Welcome to episode 73 of Mark Anthony's Music Picks. Today, I'm going to be heading into a new theme covering a topic that I haven't really talked about before. Today, I'm going to go to Detroit and go through some of my favorite Detroit classics that I've managed to accumulate over the years. I feel fortunate to have some of these records. Some of them have become expensive over the years, but it's also more about the educational factor and also just being able to partake in records that ended up being the foundation of, Detroit house and Detroit techno. So for today's episode, I have 5 favorites that I'm going to cover for you, going all the way back to 1981. And I'm going to try to give you a little bit about each artist and some of the stories around the tracks, either how they were made or how they kind of related to my life. My first pick is this one here. This is my favorite Moodymann record of all time. And this is Moodymann's Black Mahogany. For people that don't know, Moodymann is Kenny Dixon Jr., and he's really one of the founders of house music coming out of Detroit. His catalog starts as far back as 1994, and he's known for making really raw, authentic music that sounds like it really comes from the heart. I went through a phase where when I first discovered Moodymann, I was buying up all of his old records. Basically anything that had his name on it, I would go on Discogs and read some reviews about it. And there was always somebody going on about how it was the best record ever, how they'd never get rid of it, etc., etc. So for a while, I was almost buying every Moodymann record that I could get my hands on. And once the frenzy wore off, I kind of cooled down on him a little bit, and I settled into only having, believe it or not, I went from having about 20 Moodymann records to about 5. I have it basically down to 5, and I think this is the best one out of the 5. Unfortunately, right now, this is really expensive, probably $200 to $300 to get, but it's only one repress away from being affordable again. So honestly, don't pay $200 for this. Just sit and wait. Peace Frog is still active. The label that this is on is Peace Frog. They're gonna do a repress eventually. Just hang tight if you like this track and get it. Now that being said, the track that I want to feature on here is Mahogany 9000. I think it's the best track on the album. It's really interesting because it's got movie segments in it that sound like it's from an old kind of B-list action movie, and the dialogue is sort of interspersed with a track that has different movements and segments to it. So it's a very the opposite of a static track. It's got a lot of changes, and it's about 10 minutes long, and it's a journey as you move through it. My favorite part of this track is towards the end, where it basically goes from one of those movie scenes that I described into almost like a tense rhythm, and then you'll feel it switch almost as if the sun came out. It really sounds like in the music, or in Kenny's mind, that the sun came out, and it basically changes the whole tone of the track. So instead of being dark and dramatic and having, like I said, a tension in it, it just becomes free, and all of a sudden now you're outside and you can hear all these sounds of children playing and people interacting. It's basically like he took a microphone recording of a block party or a barbecue or hanging out at somebody's house and just kind of wove it into the track. And at the same time that happens, some of the keys change and it just gets all warm and sunny. It's really something special. Kenny is really one of the most interesting artists that I've ever come across. If you listen to, he doesn't have many live sets out there, but he's very laid back. He kind of advertises that he plays old, dusty, dirty records, and if the needle skips, or if he train wrecks a mix, or if he makes a mistake otherwise, he doesn't really care that much. He's kind of on the microphone with that like overly sexualized voice that he's got. And a lot of times when he's doing a performance, he'll have like different girls with him, or an entourage, kind of conveying a vibe of like old school Detroit, and trying to like convey this lifestyle that he like walks and talks, and he brings that through his music. My next pick for you is from Theo Parrish. Now, Theo Parrish is another interesting Detroit producer. He wasn't actually born in Detroit, but he ended up there, and he's become associated with the Detroit sound. I think Theo started producing in 1998, and he's known for basically keeping his sound the same for his entire career. He has a very distinct sound. It's very almost like plotty, slow and plotty, and very heavy on the low end. And sometimes the sound doesn't make sense to me, but I saw a DJ set. I never saw him live, but I saw a recording of him DJing, and I saw him kind of like doing this like side to side, shuffly, woozy, almost like he's been drinking, but he's not actually drunk, but it seems like he's kind of drunk, and the way that he moves almost explained to me why his tracks sound that way. It's almost like that's the rhythm that he feels, that's what's in his head, and that's what ends up coming through in his music. So you can definitely spot a Theo record from a mile away. That being said, this one here, Solitary Flight, probably sounds the least woozy out of anything out of his catalog, and I really enjoy it for that fact. What Theo did here was he took a sample from the movie Blade Runner. Blade Runner was like a sci-fi movie that came out in 1982. And there was a classical sample of a song. I think it was called Memories of Green. Or there was a classical piece in there. And Theo took the violin segment from that and the piano and sampled that and made it into this ever-evolving Solitary Flight. Now, people on Discogs kind of came down on the record a little bit hard, like, hey, you're claiming this as an original and it's not original. I'll tell you what, man, if you want to take a classical piece and sample it and make it into a record that sounds this good with a house rhythm behind it, to me that's totally original, and I don't think there's really anything wrong with that at all. I think it's really one of the most magical pieces that Theo ever made, and if you listen to it, it's really hard to kind of get a beat on where it's at, because even though it's only got two main samples in it working from that sci-fi movie, they're sort of like layered in different ways, and in different, there's intricacies to it that make this worth listening to repeatedly. Next up is another major Detroit producer, and that's Norm Talley. Now, Norm Talley started producing around 1997 and 1998, and he put out a few really big singles back then that became very sought after. And it's kind of odd. If you look at his catalog from 1999 to 2009, there was nothing. So I don't really know the story about what happened to him, in that 10-year period, but something must have inspired him to come back and start producing again, or maybe he experienced something that took him away from being able to produce for a while. But here, huge Norm Talley track is The Journey. Oh man, The Journey to me sounds like almost like a roller skating track. The way that the piano loop just kind of like, it's very hypnotic, and some people would say that it's a little bit too repetitive and annoying. I think it's awesome. On top of that, Norm used like a traditional disco tribal drum loop that's been used before. If you listen to the drum loop in this track, you'll hear it in other records too. But it's a good loop, right? It's the foundation for the track. And man, the one thing I noticed, I listened to this again the other day, is how punchy and round the kick drum is, man. The bass, when this thing hits, it just hits so hard. It's like, it just crushes you. I think this record, even though it's a 10-inch, is engineered really well, and it's probably maybe top 3 Norm Talley tracks of all time. The other interesting thing about The Journey is that, I said there's a break in Norm Talley's catalog. The original Journey came out in 1998, and then when Norm came back in 2009, he re-released it on this 10-inch here. But this sounds great. It's aged very well, and this is something that I would just love to play to a crowd and just really rock out with. My next pick for you guys is a record that admittedly didn't start out in Detroit, but it ended up being a major influence for many Detroit producers, so I feel obligated to talk about it. And that is Manuel Gottsching's E2 E4. So you can see E2 E4 has the chessboard pattern on here, and for people that play chess, you know that E2 E4 is the most common opening move played by white. I don't know why the track is actually named E2 E4. I know that Manuel Gottsching, I watched an interview and he basically said that he made it just because he thought it was fun. Do you know what I mean? He had absolutely no intention of it, and he had no intention of it being played on dance floors or being remixed. So when he found out that this was being remixed by Detroit producers like, for example, Derek May, it really blew his mind, because to him it was just an ambient track that really doesn't have a lot of low-end punch. If you listen to the original mix of E2 E4, you can hear a little bit of a low end. There's like a triple kick that hits, but it's really subdued and it's not in any way equipped to really hit a dance floor. That being said, Scott Grooves also came back and touched on E2 E4 in 2018, and I think that's my favorite take of the record, and I'm going to show you that one here. It's in an all black, jet black, plain black gloss sleeve, and basically what Scott did, also it's really interesting, it's got like velvet. This is like fuzzy to the touch. I love that. So it's single-sided, and you've got, I don't know, maybe a 12-minute version of E2 E4 on here, but he like housed it up. It would be the way that I would describe it to you. It got a house bass line, it got a little bit more of a kick, and probably the most interesting part of it is the live drumming that's happening. It's basically like they played E2 E4, had a drummer sit in a studio. I don't know who the drummer was, I'll have to look into that, but sit in the studio and basically just play a live rendition of E2, E4, and it sounds great. This one actually is club oriented and club friendly. I said in my review on Discogs that you could play this in the beginning of a set, and I think it would be a really good opener. And it just goes to show that E2, E4 really did have an influence on these Detroit guys, and it's for that reason it's very highly regarded still. And my last pick for today is what I would consider to be, and I haven't heard anybody refute this, the first Detroit house or Detroit techno record of all time. I don't have the original version, but I do have a vinyl that features the original version. So this is Quentin Harris's Coast to Coast. It's basically a compilation that he did probably 5-10 years ago. And it's got a number of names Sharivara on here. Sharivara is made by a group called A Number of Names, which was a trio from Detroit that made this record all the way back in 1981. It was way ahead of its time. It still sounds really good now. Like I said, I don't know who any of the three producers are. You can go and look them up on Discogs, but from what I can tell, they didn't really come back and make any more music after that. If they did, it wasn't as A Number of Names. It was maybe with solo projects, but that's all I really saw on them.
Bread and cheese and fine white wine. Designer shoes but a matter of time. Could this be the real thing? Or is this just another fling? Seen by millions nationally. Lumo folk, playgirl, G quarterly. Because he's down on his etiquette. Sharivara is really it. Sharivara. 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 Smoking on his cigarette.
In Detroit, there was a dance studio called The Scene, and it was basically the early 80s equivalent of Soul Train. And these local dancers would basically go to the scene and hang out there and wait for these recordings to start and dress their best, practice their dance moves, and then walk down this line at the scene and just bust out all these crazy dance moves. If you guys hang out to the end of this video, I'm going to attach a little segment, like 1 or 2 minutes from one of the clips from the scene so you can see what I'm talking about and you can get a feel for Sharivara. But the clip that I'm going to show you there is the first time that I can tell that Sharivara was actually played in any kind of like public context. I think it was like the actual debut of the record. So it's really cool that that was recorded, and it's just awesome that that track made in 1981 has aged so well. And this is all for today's episode, guys. I hope you enjoyed the Detroit theme. Obviously, there's going to be more to come in this department, maybe a Volume 2, Volume 3, because there's a lot more records to pull from. But I hope you found this informative. If you guys have any suggestions for titles or tracks that you want me to check out or you want me to review, please post them down in the comments. And that's all for today. Take care. Peace.
Some bread and cheese and fine white wine. Designer shit, but a matter of time. Could this be the real thing? Or is this just another fling? Sing by millions nationally. Limo, Vogue, Playgirl, G, Portal. Because he's down on his etiquette. Sharivara is really good. Sharivara. 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 Smoking on his cigarette, listening to his car cassette, cruising with his hot playmate, in his Porsche 928, heading for the highest heights, for the climax of the night. The people there, they just won't quit, because the music's really it. Sharivara. 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 Sharivara.